Welcome back to the 11th episode of the Dan and Tyler Show. I'm Dan. This is Tyler. I'm very excited to have a special guest on today. We have some great content coming your way. I'm just going to give it over to Tyler. He's going to give a shout out to the sponsor of today's episode.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back for another week. Excuse me. I wanted to first and foremost shout out to our one and only and truly great partner who is fortunate enough to sponsor us for the rest of this year. That is Nashua Lawn Maintenance out of Nashua, New Hampshire.
Yep.
They provide you with all your lawn maintenance needs. That is mowing through the summer, spring cleanups, fall cleanups, and plowing through the winter. You give Tom Gerard over there a call. He'll be happy to set you up with a quote and provide you with the very best lawn maintenance needs in Nashua area. His number is 603-888-6594. Again, that's 603-888-6594. You give Tommy Biscuits a call, and you let him know Dan and Tyler sent you, and he'll take good care of you. We love Tom, and we appreciate him sponsoring us, so shout out to Tom, and hope you're doing well, man. Before we get started with today's guest, make sure you like, subscribe, and you smash that bell.
Comment, too. We like the comments.
Yeah, comment. Give us some hits. If you like us, if you don't like us, we want to hear you. Tell us what you got, America, and give it to us truly. With that said, Dan, you want to tell us who the guest is, or you want?
Yeah, go for it.
You want another? Okay. Today's guest is none other than a family member of, I'm going to say both of ours, Dan. And a close member of the Janot's community, which is where yours truly works. And, well, with that said, today's guest is Mary Bingham from Nashua, New Hampshire.
Hi, everybody.
Did you hear the audience, guys? Mary, thank you first and foremost for coming on.
Thank you.
It means a lot, too.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for making the trek up here to the Hooksett, Manchester area.
Yep.
And I guess to the viewers that typically view us, we have quite a unique show to talk about tonight. We're excited to kind of jump into some topics that really you have spent a long and number of hours researching and getting in. I should say gathering information on. So we're excited to kind of jump into what you've learned and what you're going to inform our viewers about tonight. And I would say, as a viewer, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. So with that said, Mary, why don't you tell the viewers a little bit about what you do with your spare time if you're not at Janot's, and what got you into this?
So, I love to do family research, and that's what I do in my spare time when I'm not working at Janot's. And so one of the things that I have found out over 40 years of genealogical research is a few years ago, I found that I had some Salem witch trials connections.
That's Salem, Mass, correct?
Salem, Massachusetts,
okay.
Yes. So I have done a lot of research, and I am researching actually for a book that I'm writing about one of the women and my ancestor who was hanged, Sarah Wilds. And she is my 9 times great-grandmother. And so I thought tonight, since I know that Dan and Tyler love to talk about and research and read about government and pre-Revolutionary War things, I thought that we could talk about how the government kind of led into the Salem witch trials, along with other things, and then at the end give a personal account of my own ancestor. So
okay.
Yeah,
let's do it.
That's great.
So I'm going to start out with the Puritans and their government.
And I'll just say along the way, if Dan and I have a question, we'll hop in and kind of.
And I'll do my best
There you go.
to
Okay.
answer.
Okay.
If I can't answer your questions, then I will certainly do the research, and I will provide answers at a later time in the comments section.
Perfect.
That goes for viewers out there too. If you guys have any questions for Mary,
Yes.
Please feel free to reach out. She does have her own YouTube channel. We'll give that a shout out
Yes.
as well. So she'll be able to provide answers to you guys through both pages. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to start out with the Puritans and their government. So the Puritans were a group of Protestants who were baptized in the Church of England. And the Church of England wanted to, sorry, let me rephrase that.
Yeah, you're fine.
So the Puritans were a group of Protestants baptized in the Church of England. But the Puritans wanted to simplify their worship down to the bare bones. They felt that Queen Elizabeth I was not doing enough to eliminate all traces of prior Catholic worship, and to practice their faith became quite dangerous. Because the Puritans were aware of economic opportunities across the pond, many decided to make the dangerous trek across the Atlantic to freely practice their religion and to possibly increase their wealth and create some political separation from England. The basic theological belief was, for the Puritans, was predestination combined with living a moral life with God at the center, resulting in what we call a covenant theology.
Is that like Calvinism almost?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Interesting.
So God knew before a person's birth whether or not they were heaven or hell bound. They also believed that God would make known to a person through some type of a conversion experience if they were going to heaven or if they were going to, if they were just going straight to heaven upon their death. So to become a full covenant member of their church in the early 1600s, a person would be required to stand before the congregation and testify how God made himself known. The male members would then take a vote, and the person was either accepted as a full covenant member or not accepted. Once a person was accepted, they could partake in the Lord's Supper once a month and could have their children baptized. Even so, all inhabitants had to attend Sunday services. In the latter part of the 17th century, the halfway covenant was introduced because the beliefs of the later generations began to differ from that of their parents. Some believed that to make a change would expand, quote unquote, church membership. And I'm saying church in quotations because they actually celebrated at the meeting house, which was on Sundays for church affairs, and during the week it was used for civic affairs.
So it's more of like a multi-purpose building?
Yes, exactly.
And I'm sorry, can we go back to what year this was?
1692 is when the trials happened, but
Yeah.
I'm talking now more about the early to mid 1600s.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you. So now a person no longer had to be voted by the entire community to be a member in full communion.
Okay.
That was after the halfway covenant was accepted.
Okay.
That individual could now state their case for full membership in a private meeting with the pastor, who would thus make the decision. And though some did not have a conversion experience and were not members in full communion, their children could now be baptized.
Okay.
So the Puritans established a theocracy. So they believed in the separation of church from state, but they did not want a separation of the state from God. The Puritans wanted the government to punish sinful behaviors such as murder, drunkenness, fornication, adultery, swearing, heresy, and which was those who practiced other religions or were shipped out of the colony.
Shipped to where? Back to England, or?
Some of them were shipped to other colonies, like to New York and New Jersey.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they didn't want them in Massachusetts if they really weren't practicing the Puritan religion. And they also, actually not heresy, so to speak, but they would punish those who they considered to be worshiping witchcraft also. So witchcraft was a crime. So you might be wondering, back in the 1600s, what was a witch? So a witch was
What was witchcraft, too?
Right, and what was witchcraft? So a witch was a person that was considered to be in league with the devil. And they were believed to be able to send their specter, which is their spirit, which looked exactly like them, out to other people to afflict other persons. So that's basically what it was.
Okay.
The other thing, they believed in a visible world, and they also believed in an invisible world.
The witches did?
The Puritans did.
Gotcha. Okay.
So Puritans believed in both visible and invisible worlds. So the witches and the witchcraft were part of the invisible world.
Yep.
And they also believed, as well as women or men sending their specters out, they believed that that person or that specter would get others to sign this invisible book, so to speak, and to be, how do I want to say, in league with the devil, so that the devil would perform favors for them if they signed the book, and then they could, live better lives and get money and, all that other kind of good stuff. So that's basically what witches and witchcrafts was considered to be back in those days. Do you guys have any questions?
Yeah, I was going to say, how did it come about? Was that originally I guess, how did it come about? Was there people doing these certain things, or was it just kind of a certain belief that was part of the Puritans' belief system?
It was part of their belief system.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So.
And then what, it just became so bad that now we get fast forward to the witch trials? Is that kind of, I'm sure there's a big area in between that you're going to get to, but.
Kind of, yes, because there was so much going on in the late 1600s. So they had the Indian Wars going on. They also had the French and Indian Wars and the King Philip's War that had just ended, that they were paying high taxes on. They had
what was the tax rate?
Tax rate was actually about, I want to say, they were paying I'll correct myself if I'm wrong in the comments, but I think it was depending on how much each man made.
Yeah.
Probably about half of what they made. So it was
high.
Pretty dangerous.
Yeah.
It was very dangerous. And then they had severe weather too. They had hot winters, no. Hot summers and cold winters,
which back then was a lot harder to deal with than it is today, where we have a nice comfy home to go.
That's right. And they also relied on the weather for their crops.
Very true.
To feed their families.
Yeah, not just crops to say they have crops, but crops to live off of.
Absolutely.
Question: How were they able to differentiate the Puritans from the witches? Was it all based on false accusations, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty much.
Hearsay kind of thing.
Yes.
Okay.
So now we're going to go back a little bit to what we call the Great Migration. So in the early 1600s, England vied with France and Spain and was able to establish settlements in North America. Just to reiterate that people left England for various reasons: the rise in the cost of living and fencing in of common land, which meant that people stole the land and fenced it in as their own, leaving others with their fair share of what that land provided. And those are two additional reasons, as were previously mentioned, about religious intolerance, according to the Puritan view. So Roger Conant and 20 families came over from England and settled Salem. And the word Salem is derived from the Hebrew word shalom.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Yes, so Roger Conant, he did this with his families in 1626. So, Boston was not the first town settled. It was Salem.
Okay.
That's
factual.
That is factual, yes.
Okay.
So in 1628, the company eventually, to become known as the Massachusetts Bay Company, sent over newly appointed governor John Endicott with about 99 others to pave the way for the Great Migration, which began in 1630. The Royal Charter of Massachusetts Bay Colony was issued by King Charles I on the 4th of March, 1629, and this charter established Massachusetts Bay as a charter colony, giving the colonists the right to self-govern as long as the newly established laws aligned with the English laws. And they could also share, the colonists had to share a portion of resources harvested and have them shipped back to England.
Which is not cheap to do.
No. And let's see, any items shipped out of Massachusetts Bay would be subject to a customs fee as well. So now we come to the establishment of the towns. So the legislature determined which families settled each town.
Question for you.
Yeah?
You said John Endicott?
Yes.
Endicott College? Same.
That I'm not sure of, I would assume.
Okay. Just curious. Go ahead.
Yep. So the legislature determined which families settled each town. So basically, if you had money, you were able to settle a town. Then the meeting house
pretty
became
cool.
the center of town for Sunday service as well as civic affairs, as we talked about earlier.
So did each town have a meeting room?
Yes.
Okay.
And the inhabitants of each town had its own government, and the deputies were elected to the general court, who wrote the laws and levied the taxes, and the towns and their proprietors laid out and managed their own land lots, including the common land. So like the North Commons in Nashua, of course, was part of the original common lands when Dunstable was settled back in the day.
That was the original. Dunstable was huge.
Yes,
Dunstable,
that was huge.
That encompassed, not to get off topic, but that encompassed a lot of towns.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, just trying to set a scene for you
Yeah,
guys.
no, but that's pretty cool.
And John's Market is probably part on those common lands back in the day.
But now that's owned by the Bingham clan.
So the political scene back in England in the 1600s was not very stable.
Okay.
Policy for all the colonies were developing differently due to the lack of guidelines put forth over back yonder, across the pond by the monarchy. Therefore, each colony wound up having different goals and governmental structures. Maybe there was a fear of losing control of the colonies, leading to the reorganization of the English Empire. And some of those changes included anything bought or sold to England or the colonies had to be shipped on English vessels. Parliament then required the colony Parliament required all ships delivering goods to the colonies to pay custom duties at the English ports. And royal officials were now in the colonies to oversee internal affairs, making sure that the laws of each town aligned with those in England.
So they're pretty much just allowed to do whatever they want. Okay.
Well,
it's total opposite, though.
Pretty much when they came over, and they took advantage of that. The colonists.
Okay, so that's why all these rules were put in place.
Yeah, and then the monarchy's like, wait a minute, we think you guys are going a little too far. So that's why they kind of reel them back in a little bit, as Professor Emerson Baker says in his book, A Storm of Witchcraft.
Shout out to the book.
Yes, thank you.
To the book.
So due to the cost of King Philip's War in the 1670s, taxes soared soon after.
Sounds like today.
Yes. This also brought economic hardship in the 1680s. Frustrated, more men became politically involved, not seeing much relief, though the taxes did minimally decline after a few years. However, more political involvement led to heated debate at the meetings and removal of community leaders by angry townfolk. So by 1690, after the overthrow of Sir Edmund Andros, to be discussed momentarily, the title of freeman now could belong to anyone who took the freeman's oath. And those were people who owned a modest farm and paid their taxes. This also meant that the person could become a member of the militia.
Nice.
The new militia members could now take part in the French and Indian Wars now waging to the north, mainly in New Hampshire and Maine. So in 1684, King Charles II revoked the charter because the colonies were not abiding by the navigation trade laws, which I put forth earlier. By 1686, Massachusetts Bay Colony was consolidated with other colonies to form the Dominion of New England to kind of reel everybody in. The newly appointed royal governor, Sir Edmund Andros, controlled every government agency in America. This literally made the Puritans very angry.
Good word choice there.
Yes, because he ordered religious tolerance of all. Now, the Puritans back in those days really only tolerated their own religious beliefs. So, therefore, let me see, Andros relentlessly enforced the Navigation Act and threatened to take away titles to men who owned land, as well as the common lands. Can you imagine? You own your own house, you have your own land. Some new guy comes in, runs the government, and threatens to take your land away from you and your house and everything. And how detrimental would that be to your family?
To your family. Where do you go?
Yeah,
what do you do?
Where do you go? What do you do? How do you feed? You know, and in these cases, these families were large, like at least 7 or 8 kids per family. So it's, crazy.
Good thing there was no college.
Exactly. Although they did have Harvard College back in those
I'm
days,
sorry,
yes.
but most people didn't go to college. I should put it that way.
So Andros also limited the tax rights, and he also limited the town meetings, which was not good because then people couldn't make their voices heard.
And not receive information.
Exactly. So once the news of the overthrow of the king over in England reached colonial shores, the colonists took action, and they deposed Andros and threw his bottom into jail. Then former Governor Simon Bradstreet was appointed president of the newly formed Council of Safety. The council sent a letter to King William and Queen Mary, which justified the actions of the colonists. And the council reverted the government back to the old charter, and 86-year-old Simon Bradstreet resumed his role as governor, being elected yearly until May of 1692, when the new charter finally arrived.
86, that's pretty good for back then to live that long.
He actually lived to be 97 years old.
Wow.
In 1600s, that's amazing.
I know. So when the new charter finally arrived in 1692 in May, it was actually delivered with Sir William Phipps, who was a Maine native and was respected by the British throne. And he was appointed the royal governor of Massachusetts Bay.
Yep.
And returned to the colonies with the new charter, as I just said. So Sir William realized there was a crisis upon his arrival and was advised to set up the court of Oyer and Terminer. So let me backtrack a little bit. Once that charter was revoked,
Yep.
okay,
Yep.
there were no laws, basically, which is why that special council reverted it back to the original charter of 1629. So basically, Massachusetts Bay, as I believe it, was operating without laws, written laws, for 3 years, which was kind of dangerous if you think
Scary
about
to think
it.
about it.
Yeah.
Yes, but since they reverted back to the original charter, which was no longer in use, they were practicing English law. It was just a danger because there was nothing to put those laws back to, so to speak.
Okay.
So
Until when? Until what happened?
until Sir William Phipps comes over with the new charter,
Phipps?
but the new charter states that they had to rewrite all of the laws.
That was in 1692.
Yes. So when they had to do that, they needed to set up something fast because now the women and men were being accused of witchcraft, and the jails were starting to become overflowed, and plus all the other cases that they had to try that were not witchcraft related. They had to come up with some court system fast in order to start trying these cases. So that's where the court of Oyer and Terminer came in. And it was an official legal court, and it followed the English laws. And justices then were appointed by Sir William Phipps, and the trials began soon after. So they began sometime in early June. So the accused did not have legal representation.
Mm-hmm.
The only lawyer allowed at the trial was the Crown Attorney General, who served as a prosecutor of sorts, as we would know it today. So he would bring the accused through the grand jury process and prosecute people who were indicted. And the other thing at this trial, or these trials, was that spectral evidence was admitted. So, and then, you know, talked about the specters and everything, people seeing the specters. That was evidence at trial.
How? No, you understand?
Isn't that crazy?
It is.
It's crazy. It was crazy that we think of it that way today, but it was very real back then.
I was going to say, thank you. From a 2021 perspective, how? Like,
yes, exactly.
But I understand it was a different world, literally.
Exactly. So now I'm going to backtrack to earlier that year, more towards January and February. It was believed by the local minister, Reverend Samuel Paris, that Satan was attacking Salem Village. So Salem Village was the northern part of Salem.
Present-day Salem.
No, actually, it's present-day Danvers now.
Oh.
Then it was Salem Village.
Okay.
Because Danvers never became incorporated as a town until 1752.
Oh, okay.
But so it was part of the what I call and what Emerson Baker calls in his book a supersized Salem.
Okay.
So yes, so it was part back in those days what would have been Salem. Back in those days would have been Danvers, Middleton, parts Peabody, I believe.
Okay.
And let me see, I'm forgetting one.
Is there a Topsfield too?
Topsfield was actually incorporated as its own town in 1650.
Oh, okay.
So yes, so Topsfield that was actually prior Ipswich.
Okay.
So
Yep.
yes, that was actually not quite. It was just north of Danvers. So so those were the towns, and I know I'm missing one off the top of my head. That was part of that supersized Salem. But yeah, so when I speak of Salem Village now, I'm talking about what is Danvers today. So let me see. So Reverend Samuel Paris believed that Satan was attacking Salem Village, and that was considered a farming community located northwest of Salem town, today known as the town of Danvers.
Was it Beverly?
I don't think so, because Beverly had its own minister back in the day.
Okay, sorry, I'm just looking up surrounding towns.
Yeah.
Danvers, Beverly, Middleton, you said, right?
Yeah, Middleton was all, yeah.
Peabody, Linfield?
Oh, I have to check that. You know what? Let me look that up, and in the comments below, I'll put exactly what towns were part of it.
Okay.
Thank you. So Samuel Paris was known to be a divisive character, and also believed to be arrogant by members of his worshiping community. He most likely practiced his fiery 2 to 3 hour sermons in the parsonage where he lived with his wife Elizabeth, his daughter Betty, his niece, who she was a girl that was somehow related to him, but we're not sure exactly how.
Oh.
So I'll call her his niece, Abigail Williams, and his 2 slaves, who were Tituba and John Indian.
Okay.
And they call them Indian as their surname because they were different. And even though they actually were purchased by the Paris family in Barbados, we're not sure exactly of their ethnic origins.
Interesting.
So one can surmise this frightened the young girls to hear these sermons in their tight living quarters. So early in 1692, the girls start to convulse and have strange fits, which included racing around the house and contorting their bodies in very unnatural-like postures, while screaming and saying they were being poked, pinched, and choked by some invisible force. So scared for his daughter and his niece, Samuel did all he could to receive a proper diagnosis for the girls. He held prayer gatherings in his home with area ministers and sought out medical advice from the local doctor who lived about 2 miles east of the parishes, and his name was Dr. William Griggs. After careful evaluation, Dr. Griggs diagnosed Betty and Abigail as being under an evil hand. So someone's specter was causing these girls' afflictions, according to what they believed, and only the girls could see who was afflicting them. So the specter they saw was of the household slave, Tituba. So about the same time, another Salem village family who lived more than a mile west of the parsonage witnessed the same type of affliction in 2 young girls in their home. That would be Thomas and Ann Putnam. And they watched in horror and demanded to know the names of the specters who were responsible for their 12-year-old daughter Ann Jr.'s afflictions. So Ann named Sarah Good, a poor homeless woman, and the Putnam maid, 17-year-old Elizabeth Hubbard, named Sarah Osborne, a woman sadly considered of ill repute after she married her indentured servant, amongst other things. So shortly after, on February 29th, Thomas Putnam and his brother Edward, along with Joseph Hutchinson and Thomas Preston, and Thomas Preston, ironically, is a son-in-law to Rebecca Nurse, who will soon be accused herself. So those 4 gentlemen traveled to Salem town and filed the charges against Tituba, Sarah Good, and Sarah Osborne for afflicting the 4 young ladies previously mentioned. The Salem witch hunt has now begun, with the first preliminary hearings occurring the next day at Nathaniel Ingersoll's tavern. The many townspeople who crowded into the room at the tavern posed a dilemma for the justice of the peace who presided. And they're also called magistrates back in those days.
Okay.
But today they're JPs. Eventually, the examinations were moved to the meeting house to cater to the large crowds. Eventually, again, the examinations were moved down the road to the meeting house, so it really wasn't too far. The accused entered the examination room where the magistrates would be seated 8 feet in front of them, so probably the distance between myself and Derek.
Shout out to Derek, our producer.
Yes, Derek, thank you very much.
Who's not a witch, don't worry.
And the accusers would be in between. So here I am, the
Yep.
accused,
Yep.
the accusers, and then the magistrates.
Okay.
Oof.
Or the JP.
The JPs, yes. So the accusers were going into their tormented fits with loud crowds behind them, while the magistrates were grilling and badgering the accused with questions. Can you imagine how awful that was? Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne bravely and boldly claimed their innocence to the crime of witchcraft. Tituba, uncertain of her future, caved and made a false confession. But you know what? I certainly understand where she's coming from. Imagine being badgered and badgered and badgered until you finally just say, oh my, I'm just gonna, I'm just gonna cave in right now. I'm just gonna say yes and just get it over with. So everyone, though, who eventually made a false confession named other witches, and Tituba was the first to do so, which led to the accusations of 9 other people and added a spark which fueled the fire to spread very quickly to the neighboring towns all over Essex County. And one person on whom I would like to focus is my 9 times great-grandmother, Sarah Wiles.
So before we start with her, just from that one match, all that happened.
Yes.
Wow. Powerful.
Isn't that crazy?
Powerful.
Now, there was 8 in all, right, that were accused? Or maybe more, but...
Right now. So yeah, so right now there were the 3 that were accused, and then Tituba names about 9 more. So now it's going to start.
And she was one of that first family's slaves, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes. So the person I would like to focus on is my 9 times great grandma, Sarah Wilds. And Sarah was born Sarah Averill, and she was baptized in March of 1627 at Chipping Norton, England, in the county of Hertfordshire. And it was like in the area of the Oxford area in England.
Like Oxford College?
Yes.
Okay.
So very close to there, in that particular area.
Okay.
She arrived with her family and settled at Ipswich, circa 1637, very close to where her future husband lived.
Mm-hmm.
Not much of her life is documented during her younger years, except that she was charged with fornication in 1649 and dressing above her station in 1663.
What's that mean?
So dressing above her station was because the Averills were considered to be lower middle class. They had to dress as such.
Okay.
So
She was trying to dress fancier than her such.
Right. So she actually was spotted at some point in time wearing a scarf. And
Stop
shoes.
traffic, everybody.
stop traffic, that's right. So she was wearing a scarf,
Yeah.
and she probably shouldn't have been wearing a scarf. Who
Or-
knows? That scarf could have been a gift from somebody. She could have found it somewhere, but she was wearing that scarf. So she was actually got off with that one with a fine, and it's also believed that in that year, 1663, her parents had already passed away, and her brother William had charge of the homestead in Ipswich, and he had started to make some money. So she could have still been living with her brother at that time, and since his wealth increased, maybe hers did as well, which is maybe why she got off with a fine. I've actually looked into those 2 charges against her.
Yeah, is there court documents?
The court documents, and I went and talked to, actually I emailed the Massachusetts State Archives,
Yep.
and unfortunately they don't have any more information, so
Okay.
we don't really know like any depositions or anything. They just don't exist in those particular cases, unfortunately.
This is back in 63?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, and that was actually, this last charge of hers, dressing above her station, that was made against her just a few months before she moved to Topsfield and married her husband.
Okay.
So, that being said, she moves to Topsfield and married John Wilds, and she was John Wilds' second wife because his first wife had died earlier that year.
Do you know of what?
I'm sorry?
Do you know what she passed away of?
No, but she, so his first wife was Priscilla Gould Wilds, and she died about 3 weeks before her infant child, Nathan, died. So it could have been complications due to the childbirth. We just don't know.
Okay.
100%.
Being that close together, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. And infancy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
That's tough.
he moved on quickly. Is that what they said?
Yes. That's one of the things that they do say is that he moved on quickly, but you also have to think that he had 8 children at home. He didn't have a woman in the house, and in those days they needed each other to run that household. So she needed to be doing the chores, and he needed to be running the outside farm. And he probably had some type of help, probably from the Averill neighbors, who were, of course, his wife's family. So they may have come over and helped him with that. But the thing is that he was probably in dire need of somebody because his children were between the years of 3 and 12. Those were his daughters. His 2 older sons were probably in their teenage years at that time. So, yeah, he needed somebody because what they did in the house was absolutely incredible. I mean, they had to do all of the cooking, they had to do the spinning, the washing, the weaving, everything to make life livable. It was like a dire circumstances for the poor guy.
Yeah. I bet that wasn't that uncommon too back then.
Yes. So, and then of course she needed her husband to protect her and to be out in the fields. But the interesting thing about Sarah and John is that Sarah probably was considered what they would have referred to as a deputy husband back in those days, because he was very active in town affairs and he was away from the homestead a lot. So in his absence, she had to make all the administrative decisions. So he had to entrust her with that. So there must have been some type of a really strong bond that developed between them, because by the time at least the late 1670s roll around, he has her back. And when she starts getting accused by her neighbors of doing things that she didn't do, he threatens lawsuit, and he was not a man to threaten lawsuits, but he did in one particular case that I will discuss a little bit later. Yeah. So where was I? Oh, I got on my tangent. Love it. So I say that Sarah became a stepmother to John's 8 children, again ranging from ages 13 to 12 were his daughters, and then his 2 older sons were in their teenage years. It is not certain whether or not Sarah and John loved each other at the time of their marriage. However, Sarah's family of origin was middle to lower class, as I stated earlier. She definitely married up upon her marriage to John. However, the court records of 1692 clearly state that John loved her and did all he could to defend Sarah when her neighbor, Mary Reddington, started to spread rumors that Sarah was a witch back in the late 1670s.
Her name's Mary?
Mary Reddington, yes. Well, Mary Reddington was the sister of John Wilde's first wife. And she...
Well, there's the rumors.
She may have...
That explains the rumors, right?
So she didn't like Sarah, though.
Yeah, she didn't like that Sarah, got on board with John so quickly after, probably.
Maybe.
And then started, and just started to spread rumors about, who's he, what's it, and...
That's what you did back in the day when you didn't like someone.
Exactly.
Send them to go get hung.
Nowadays, you just post on Facebook.
That's what I was thinking. Like somebody you just posted on Facebook, right? And start spreading the rumors that way.
Start spreading.
So Mary Reddington may have suffered some type of depression upon the death of her sister.
Sure.
And possibly disapproved of Sarah raising her nieces and nephews. Well, in 1677...
Maybe, sorry.
Yeah, could be.
Maybe Mary was jealous of Sarah.
That could be, too.
Maybe Mary wanted John.
No.
I don't know.
Could have happened. Could be.
Could be. So in 1677, Mary Reddington and her daughter traveled to the home of Reverend John Hale at Beverly.
Oh, okay.
So Mary can lay out all of her grievances she had against Sarah to John Hale, who was the minister. Mm-hmm. One of the stories he shared in his deposition against Sarah in 1692, as told to him by Mary, was that Mary's nephew, Sarah's stepson, John Wilde Jr., heard Mary speak of Sarah, and he also believed that Sarah was a witch. However, today this would be considered as hearsay, but it was still offered against Sarah at her trial.
Interesting.
About the same time, it was back then, but I know, but we think
I know.
today.
It's hard to put yourself in that world, but when you hear it in today's standards, it's just so.
It's amazing.
Yeah,
isn't
it's just.
About that same time in 1677, when Mary was physically sick, she invited her brother, John Gould, to document a situation between her and Sarah so the story would live on.
Mary's husband, right?
No, Mary's brother.
Mary's brother.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So she invites her brother, John Gould, to write. Oh, sorry, Tyler.
No, you're fine.
To write a story that she supposedly experienced with Sarah, and she wanted it documented so that the story would live on after Mary died.
She was obviously very sick at this point.
Yes, she was.
Okay.
Yes. So, according to Mary, as she tells her brother John, she's traveling home by horseback with her brother-in-law from Salem.
Yep.
Mary felt someone, whom she later claimed to be Sarah, pull her down from her horse in a brook 2 or 3 times. The last time she was pulled down, Mary claimed that Sarah pinned her down in the brook so she could not get up without assistance from her brother-in-law and neighbor Edmund Town, who lived nearby. So what is not clear is if Mary was accusing Sarah herself of being present, or was it Sarah's specter,
Which is a spirit.
which is her spirit, yes, of pulling her down. But the thing is that Sarah herself was a full covenant member of the Topsfield Church at that time, and probably would not have been involved in such violent behavior. So I conclude that Mary was speaking about Sarah's specter pulling her off the horse. John, now realizing that the rumors about his wife are going out of the town of Topsfield, gets really mad. And he goes to his former brother-in-law's house, which is actually right next door to him.
Oh.
Like, we're talking within yards.
Okay.
Probably, well, maybe not yards, maybe a few, less than a mile, I should say. Maybe
Yeah,
about a tenth
yeah.
of a mile.
Because everything was spread out back then, but
Yes. So probably about a tenth of a mile. And
Yeah.
he goes to John Reddington and he says, look, you got to cut this stuff out. You got to tell your wife to stop slandering against my wife. Legally, John Wilds could not file a lawsuit against Mary. Everything had to be represented by men in the court of law back in those days.
so it would actually be against her husband.
Yep.
Okay.
And file it against her husband.
Yep.
So John Reddington begs John Wilds not to do it because of the cost to his estate. And he also says to John, and besides, my wife is going to be done talking about your wife soon enough. So let's just,
Because she's gonna pass away.
maybe. Yeah, maybe. He says, it's kind of, actually you brought up a really good point there. I never thought of that, but that could be true. And John wasn't satisfied with that, though. So John goes to his new brother-in-law, Sarah's brother, William, and he asked him to go talk to Mary herself. And Mary told William that she had nothing against Sarah. But Mary always denied her gossip when her feet were held to the fire. She even did that with her brother when she asked her brother to write down those stories. John Gould deposes in 1692 that he said, when I would go to write down the story, my sister could not declare it. So it never officially got written down until the deposition in 1692.
Okay.
Isn't that wild? No pun intended, sorry.
No, I was gonna say.
So, the situation for the Wilds family in 1692 was interesting. After they got married in 1693, they had one child together, and his name was Ephraim. And in 1690, Ephraim, because he was now the oldest surviving son of John Wilds, his 2 previous sons died in King Philip's War in the late 1670s. So Ephraim was now deeded the entire homestead, which actually included a 3-mile area in Topsfield that also was the barns, the outhouses,
Wow.
everything, any buildings, everything, so that John would not have any type of estate to administer at the time of his death.
Yep.
which was probably a good deal. And the other thing is that his son Ephraim had worked for him pretty much for 7 years when he could have been earning his own income.
Sure, sure.
So that's why John deeded everything over to him in 1690. And Ephraim was married at this particular time too. His wife, Mary, and he and Ephraim married in 1688. And so by 1692, in that house in Topsfield would have been Mary, Ephraim, and Ephraim's father and mother, John and Sarah,
Okay.
plus Ephraim and Mary's infant daughter and 2-year-old son. So on April 22nd, 1692, the Marshal of Salem rode up to the Wilds' house and showed Ephraim and John the warrant bearing the name of his mother and several others from the town to be arrested for witchcraft, and that would have been the town of Topsfield.
Okay.
John was probably shown the warrant because he was well respected and active in town affairs all his life. And Ephraim was the constable of Topsfield. Constable meaning he was
Like the police officer.
he was a police officer. So he shows John and Ephraim the warrant, arrest Sarah, and he gives Ephraim the warrant and he says, no, you got to go get all the others
Okay.
in the town.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So their beloved mother and wife was escorted from their home, never to return.
Really?
And Ephraim had to turn around and watch in horror with all of this, and had to turn around and go and arrest everybody else
On that
in
list.
Topsfield.
Wow.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
Because of this, though, because he had to round them up, he had to bring them down to Salem town, to Salem Village, to
Yep.
the meeting house in Salem Village, now Danvers.
Okay.
Thank God he was most likely present at his mother's preliminary hearing. Sarah remained respectful and steadfast during this proceeding. And remember, we talked about how everything was just going on in the meeting house room and how it was just so disorderly and noisy and everything.
Yep.
But she remained respectful. She always referred to the magistrates as sirs. And she stood steadfast and clearly denied her guilt, saying, I thank God I am free. Sarah stood in her truth and did not cave into the pressure. So after her examination, Sarah was carted to the Salem jail, in Salem town now, where her roommates were rats, lice, mice, and vermin.
Yee.
Her cell was very hot and dark, with a dirt floor and iron bars. Sarah would have been shackled, as Puritans believed the iron shackles prevented the specters of witches to go and afflict their accusers while they were in jail. In addition, the Wilds family had to pay for her room and board, as well as her food and her shackles, while Sarah was incarcerated.
Interesting.
They also had to pay for her execution as well.
It's an interesting concept.
So due to the overcrowding of the jails, Sarah was transferred several times before making her final trip back to the Salem jail just before her trial. She traveled 80 miles in 6 weeks between all of her jail transfers, and one of those jails actually stood probably within a half a mile of where her childhood home was in Ipswich.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Eerie.
During these 6 weeks, John and Ephraim went to see her on a weekly basis at a great cost to their estate, which actually in today's dollars would have been about $2,000. I figured out a few weeks ago.
Okay. Wow.
And that would not include all those fees that they had to pay that I talked about, the jails and, everything that she needed and the food and everything. Also, at this time, John was 74 years old, and those cart rides took upwards from about 2 hours one way. So they went to comfort her and bring her what she needed. The other thing too is when one of them left that farm, there was one less person left to man the farm,
Right.
do the crops, feed the family, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really, so that end of it too is
That
just
hurt that side of it.
devastating. So that's why I say that they really had her back, because they were willing to do all that, to sacrifice that, to make sure that she had what she needed. So Sarah was officially tried at the court in Salem town, which actually stood on Washington Street, on July 2nd in 1692, and she was found guilty. And her death warrant was signed on July 12th. And she was hanged at Proctor's Ledge, July 19th, along with Susanna Martin, Elizabeth Howe, Sarah Good, and Cindy's great-grandmother, Rebecca Nurse.
Shout out to Cindy Hobbs, also known as Cindy Twist.
Yes. A crowd of family and friends and curiosity seekers, elected officials and ministers were present to witness the hangings.
Interesting.
Historian Charles Upham believes Sarah to be most likely a patient, humble, but firm sufferer at the time of her death. Whereas Sarah Good, who was hanged along with them, Sarah Good, she was feisty. So
Sarah Good was not good.
Sarah Good. So the story goes, as tradition states, the Reverend Nicholas Noyes from Salem town was there, and what he did was he offered for those that were just about to be hanged to confess, to clear their souls so that they could get to heaven, okay? Sarah Good, she was not having any of it, and she looked at him and she said, I am not a witch, just like you're not a wizard, and if I die, you will have blood to drink. Basically, that's what she says. And about a few years later, Reverend Nicholas Noyes dies, and he's foaming blood at the mouth.
Really?
Interesting.
Yes.
That's an interesting story.
Coinkydink?
Oh, that's
Yeah.
well. I think I read somewhere, and I hope this is correct. I think it is that he actually died of a brain hemorrhage, and that's what caused the blood to come to his mouth.
Still a little bit kind of ironic.
Interesting. Yes.
No,
Sad for him.
how did Sarah Good spell her last name?
Good,
Oh,
and
okay.
sometimes with an E at the end,
Gotcha.
I believe.
Okay,
Did you get that?
I wrote it down.
But Sarah Wilde's story really doesn't end here. Her life was lived on in those who loved her. Her husband married again.
Good for him.
Mary Jacobs. Now Mary.
At 74, he's still slaying it down.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh.
So he married Mary Jacobs.
Crazy.
Now, Mary Jacobs
Okay.
was the wife of George Jacobs, who
Okay.
also was hanged.
George was.
George was hanged
Okay.
in 1692.
So there was a lot of men who were hanged?
Yes.
Okay.
There were some.
Okay.
Yes. There were some men that were
It
hanged.
sounds like it was mostly women, though.
I'm not sure what you know what?
The ratio
Got it
is?
right on my shirt here if anybody wants to see. I gotta check to see the ratio of men to women. But yes, there were men that
That's a good question, though, right? I mean,
were accused of being witches.
okay.
Yes.
So he got remarried.
Yep. So John remarried Mary Jacobs
Yep.
in June of 1693. And John was also welcomed as a member in full communion at the Topsfield Church in 1697, which was a great achievement for this aging man who served this community well over the years.
Okay.
And when John died in 1705, at 87 years old, he was affectionately referred to as Old Father Wilds.
Oh.
So Ephraim, his only son with Sarah, as you already know, and Mary, Ephraim's wife, they fathered 16 children,
Wow.
13 of who survived into adulthood. And Ephraim followed in his father's footsteps as he went on to serve Topsfield in many capacities until his own death in 1725.
Okay.
So after the Supreme Court of Judicature was established, actually, let me go back now to 1692. So when they realized probably in September of 1692 that spectral evidence was really not best to be admitted into these cases. They decided to take down or close the court of Oyer and Terminer. And then they reorganized the court of judicature, Supreme Court of Judicature, which is now the court that Massachusetts uses.
Oh, okay.
So that was established, and then since spectral evidence was no longer accepted in late 1692, now going into 1693, actually, I should say that the trials stopped between September of 1692, and then they reorganized, and then the trials resumed in 1693. They came to a close in May of 1693, and the accused who survived and were found not guilty, and even those couple that were found guilty, nobody hanged again. So they were all released from jail when their jail fees were paid. So that's good news. So now going back to after the hangings and after probably about 1710, Massachusetts Bay, after they'd realized their horrendous error, they offered families who came forward to restore their loved ones' names by overturning their convictions and repaying the damages suffered to their estates. So September 10th, Ephraim offered his petition before the court. And what I'm going to read to you guys now is Ephraim's own words, what he said way back in 1710. To the honored gentlemen of the committee greeting, it having pleased the great and general court to appoint your honors a committee to inquire who may be proper to be justified in the bill to the taking of the attainder, and what loss and damage has been sustained by reason of the trials which were for witchcraft in the year 1692, under which sorrowful trial Sarah Wilds, my mother, was condemned and executed. My father being now deceased, and myself only left, I here appear to give in some short account of the cost and damage we sustained in them times. My mother was carried to Salem prison sometime in April. We were at the cost of it and charged of accepting her there. And the charge of keeping her there a considerable while, and afterwards she was removed to Boston prison. We were at the cost of it and charged of keeping her there for about 2 months. And then from Boston, she was removed back to the Ipswich prison. We were at the charge and cost of that. And after a while, she was removed to Salem again, and we were at all the cost of both caring and providing for her maintenance while in these prisons. Besides, either my father or myself went once a week to see how she did and what she wanted, and sometimes twice a week, which was at a great cost and damage to our estate. My father would often say that the cost and damage we sustained in our estate was 20 pounds, which again today was about a little over $2,000.
Okay.
And I am in the mind he spoke less than what it was. Besides the loss of so dear a friend, which cannot be made up, all which I leave to your honor's consideration, I remain your honor's humble servant, Ephraim Wilds. Yet notwithstanding 'twas 20 pounds damage to our estate, considering our names may be repaired, I am willing to take 14 pounds. And they, amongst all the others who applied for restitution that year, everybody was granted
Really?
their restitution, and the Wilds estate was granted 14 pounds that was repaid to their estate. And also this particular petition tells me that Ephraim and John spoke of their family member that was hanged after she died, and that they found comfort in each other,
Yeah.
which was truly amazing. So there's so many things in this book that I have here called Records of the Salem Witch Hunt. It's a huge book, but anybody that is really interested in the research and really wants to go to the primary sources, this is the book to go to, because you have all of the people that were involved, all of the accused, the accusers, everybody, the judges, magistrates, constables, everybody is named, and there's so many important words that these people spoke, and it all survives.
Yeah.
The only thing that does not survive are the actual trials themselves.
Okay.
The trial documents have all been lost, but these are all the preliminary, the arrest warrants, most of which survive, just almost everything you could ever imagine.
Wow.
And it brings their stories to life. One of my favorite sayings was actually Mary Jacobs' husband, George Jacobs, when he was being badgered in the courtroom.
Mm-hmm.
Question coming after him, and he's like, "Are you a witch? You're a witch. You're a witch. You know, you're doing this. Why don't you just confess?" He just looks at the magistrates and says, "Well, burn me or hang me. I stand in the truth of Christ. I know nothing of witchcraft." And
they still
hanged him.
murdered him.
Yeah.
How many total?
So there were 20 that were executed, 19 were hanged.
Wow.
One was crushed to death. That was Giles Corey.
By
And-
choice, or what do you mean crushed
Oh
to death?
gosh!
Yeah, he was crushed to death because he refused to enter a plea.
Wow.
So back then, if you refused to enter a plea, you
Gosh.
were considered mute. So to get him to enter a plea, they brought him over to the area of where Howard Street Cemetery is in Salem, Mass. Today. They
Okay.
believe that's the area. And they put stones on him, and it took him 2 days before he finally gave up. But he never entered a plea.
Wow.
And the stones basically just.
Kept piling them on.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he was 80 years old.
Oh gosh.
He was 80 years old.
Oh my goodness.
And then there were 5 that died in jail.
Okay.
Yes.
While they were going through the process, or
Or like starvation, or getting sick from the mice.
was it the rats? The
Yes.
was it
Yeah.
mealworms, rats,
Yeah, everything.
everything? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Crazy.
So that's my story about my Salem witch trials.
Well, yeah, very cool and very well done. Very. I knew coming into this that the research was very well done,
Yeah.
and
Thank
it's
you.
evident in your storytelling today. And I'm glad that just the fact that we were able to have you on was just an honor. I think I say that for both
Yeah,
Dan and I.
absolutely.
Is there anything that you want your viewers to know in terms of information that you're going to release into the future? Will it be via your YouTube channel? Will it be via... Obviously, we know
Yes.
you're writing a book, which is going to be awesome when that comes out.
Can't wait. Still heavy into the research, trying to get a publisher.
Yep.
So we'll keep our fingers crossed that that process is really forthgoing by the end of this year.
Okay.
I do have a YouTube channel called Sarah Wilds 1692.
Yep.
And on that particular channel, I go more into depth of Sarah's life in Topsfield, as well as her early life in Ipswich.
Okay.
And I also have a video on there that's actually got more than like 2,000 views. And it's my video of what Proctor's Ledge looks like today in relation to where Gallows Hill is in Salem. Gallows Hill is in Salem, which is not far. I also have a video on there called The Final Journey, which I walk from where the old Salem jail once stood to Proctor's Ledge. But it's not the journey, but it's my journey from there. It's the safest journey to walk from where that old jail once stood to Proctor's Ledge.
Okay.
I also have related stories on there. One is about the Waters and the Towns, actually about Edmund Town's wife Mary and her neighbor Mary Waters, and how they Nope. And how they stood against a gentleman who was being pretty nasty to Mary Waters. So, which was really, really good that those women were able to stand up for each other. Yeah, and a few other cool things. Another video is coming soon that's actually going to chronicle in more detail about Sarah's journey from her home in Topsfield to the execution site and after. We'll talk more about Ephraim's family and what he did and everything. So
Very cool.
yes.
Very, very cool.
And also too, if any of you that are interested, Rebecca Nurse Homestead is still open until at least the end of October on Saturdays and Sundays.
I was gonna say, is that what you are every Saturday,
That's
right?
where I am every
Yeah,
Saturday.
volunteering.
Rebecca Nurse, as you all know, was considered a saint in her church, so she would have been one of those that was considered going right to heaven when she died, until she was convicted of witchcraft, and then she was excommunicated from her church.
Ah.
But then once
Excommunicado.
yeah, but then once everything was over, her name was reinstated in the church, and she was brought back into full communion after her death. Yeah.
Wow.
So yes, so the Rebecca Nurse Homestead is actually open Saturdays and Sundays 10 to 3, with the last tour beginning at 2:30. And you can email them for more information at the RebeccaNurseHomestead.org. So yeah,
Very
it's
cool.
a lot of fun.
Well, I think I speak for both Dan and I when I say awesome job. I mean,
Thank you. And
awesome having you on.
Tyler, this is part of your family now too.
Well, exactly. I mean, I'm married. So for the viewers out there, I am married to Mary's niece, Lauren, and and my wife and I are very interested in your research. So it's cool to learn about it. Cool to have you on the show. Cool to kind of get a little bit of the behind the scenes of the whole story. Right, get to know a lot more than We talk. Mary and I work together, so we talk at work, here and there with coffee and passing, and I get little tidbits of information. But this is cool to have you on and kind of get more in depth and more of the scope of the story. So,
thank you.
Dan, do you have anything you want to add before we shout out to our sponsor and wrap it up?
No, just a big thanks for coming out, and thank
Yeah.
you for all the information and the history.
Thank you.
I'm a history buff myself, so
Yeah.
I enjoy this kind
I
of
think
stuff.
that's why we were both most excited to have you on, was to kind of get your perspective on the story and your perspective on the history of it, and
Thank you.
yeah, so much appreciated.
And
Yes.
I'm honored to be on the show. Thank you.
Well, we'll have to have when your book comes out, we'll have to have you back on, and then we'll do a book signing.
There you go.
I like it.
And thank you, Derek.
Yeah, and as always, thank you to Derek over there.
Yep. Big shout out.
Big shout out to Derek. Huge.
Massive shout out to Derek at Apex Studios. Go check him out.
Yeah, please go check him out. All right, well, with that, the old folks in Asheville Lawn want us to wrap it up, so we're going to say until next time, we're going to sign off, and Dan and Tyler Show, episode 11.
Yeah.
Boom, done.
Boom.
Thanks, guys. God bless. Be great.
We'll see you guys next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great job, Mary.